everybody still alive out there? I mean, I am, and while the whole don't occupy the same room as another human being for any time, no matter what thing, has sort of put Katie and the poor taste buds on hold, and 8 weeks of quarantine at this point have left me a grizzled husk of a man, it does seem like the perfect time for me to finally jump in to my first ever extra-long Animorphs Megamorphs, am I right? Animorphs Megamorphs #1, The Andalite Skipped, was first published in June of 1997, about 2 months after The Strangler. Maybe. See, I know that it was originally published in 2 parts. The first part, I assume, came out in May of 1997. The second part came out in June of 1997. And then, of course, it wasn't compiled into a single book, at least according to Wikipedia, until they were getting ready to release Megamorphs #2. I could probably find more specific details if I would just go to Seropedia, the Animorphs wiki. But I try not to go there anymore for fear of spoilers. I know that Jake has a last name, though thankfully I cannot remember what it was. Where was I? Oh, right! June of 97, and was written by K. Applegate and published by Scholastic. No surprises there. Now, for those of you that don't know, but are watching this for some reason, the 4 Megamorphs books are part of the main continuity, taking place at various times throughout the series. What makes them special is that, unlike in The Predator, or The Visitor, or The Unexpected, I assume, I haven't actually read this one yet, the Megamorphs are told by the entire team, the point of view changing from chapter to chapter, which is great, because it means I can finally whip out some next-level adverbs like meanwhile and elsewhere, so that's pretty dope. Having said that, you guys should just strap in now, because we got so much ground to cover, I don't even have time to give you a spoiler warning, though I guess that works. Jake takes 2 full pages to tell us that he's an Animorph and he has no last name, and it yerks her bad before suddenly being at Cassie's barn with, everyone, debating whether or not Rachel should attend the impending 2-day gymnastics camp that she signed up for well before she could turn into an elephant. Most of the team agrees that she should go. What could happen in 2 days, they wonder, clearly forgetting every single one of Murphy's laws and apparently the entirety of the series up to this point. Anyway, after Jake reveals Cassie's theory that may be the first overt reference to Rachel's implied crush on the bird, and some casual foreshadowing from Marco, Jake and Cassie step outside to bring in some fresh cages and talk about dreams? I don't know, apparently Cassie's been suffering a recurring one of late, again, in which some unknown entity demands that she decide who lives and who dies. And rather than point out the obvious parallels to when that literally happened in the last book, Jake decides not to point out the obvious parallels to when that literally happened in the last book. Rachel takes 2 more pages to tell us that she's an Animorph and how she's an Animorph and that she has 2 sisters and where everybody lives relative to each other before arriving at the school an hour early to catch the bus to gymnastics camp. Why so early? Naturally, she wants a little extra time to find Tobias to say goodbye. For a 2-day trip. Ah, young love. But seeing as how Tobias is only like 2 feet tall and lives in the woods, she knows that her pitiful human eyes just won't do the trick. So she eagles up and takes off, all while waxing about how dangerous a position she didn't even realize she was putting herself in until just now. Because nobody knows where she is, so if something were to happen, don't worry about it. She's flying, and she's looking, and she's foreshadowing, and then she spots Axe and decides to give him the old flyby what up, when you know it, a bunch of crows decided she in the wrong neighborhood. As the murder swarms her in a turn of events that's much less weird if you remember that Tobias gave a speech about how crows are a-holes back in chapter 1, she's forced to take evasive maneuvers. She dives and tucks and barrel rolls right into a tree, breaking more than a few bones and thinking to herself, oh shit, I should probably demorph, before losing consciousness on the forest floor. Marco takes another page to tell us that he's an Animorph and who everybody else is and the roles within the group before explaining to Axe that that party that he foreshadowed about back in chapter 1 is in fact proof that Darlene, who invited everyone but him, is madly in love with him. Rather than explaining how that makes sense to the alien who's only been here for a few weeks, Marco instead invites himself and the alien who's only been here for a few weeks to Darlene's party. Even Axe knows that this seems like a terrible idea. Fortunately, Marco is prepared to offer a trade. Axe comes to the party, and Marco gives him some flea powder for that nasty flea problem he apparently has. Tobias, who I guess is just so much ravaged by the need to feel useful ever since becoming a Nothlet that he eschews his usual level-headedness, swings by to deliver a mouse for them to acquire, which is good, because it gives Marco the opportunity to explain how acquiring works. Again, the rest of the chapter is devoted to Tobias explaining that he saw a bunch of crows attack a bald eagle earlier, and then me suddenly realizing that the names of books 3 and 5 really should be swapped. Jake doesn't explain any more things that we already know, and instead finds himself riddled with guilt for his uninvited best friend as he lounges beside Darlene's pool with Cassie, and they do their best impressions of normal children. Of course, the facade is shattered almost immediately when the lady of the hour herself, Darlene, screams bloody murder as if she's being chased by a gorilla or something. When really she's just being chased by Marco and Axe in decidedly less intimidating mouse morphs. As the party explodes like only a middle school party that's suddenly overrun with rodents can, it takes Jake and Cassie probably less than 0 seconds to realize what's going on. Our fearless leader strolls right over to those filthy varmints, and in a manner that would most certainly make him look insane if anybody were handling this situation like an actual human would, warns them that mice who want to live go with Cassie. They don't. Marco and Axe manage to avoid the dozens of feet trying to stomp them and follow Darlene inside. Fortunately, mere moments later, the rapscallions report via ThoughtSpeak that they've taken cover in the basement to assume human form. Desperate to prevent anyone from going mouse hunting downstairs, Jake makes a tactical call and trips over someone. That actually was a great call, apparently, because in Jake's own words, that pile-up saved my life. As he lay helpless on his back like some sort of, I don't know, animal on his back or something. In a pile of other upside-down animals. They all watch in bewilderment as the sun vanishes behind what can only be described as a big, flat tornado in the sky. Meanwhile, Marco feels that this impending disaster is the right time to catch us up on how exactly he and Axe got to the party. Spoilers, it's exactly how you think. All while taking another page to explain that when you morph an animal for the first time, sometimes its instincts can be kind of hard to control, and that mice are hyper, hungry, frightened little buggers, not unlike those shrews that unfortunately nobody's ever taken the time to explain to us, the readers. Where was I? Oh, right. Marco and Axe morphed mice a block away and walked. So, yeah, when they got to the party and located Darlene, Marco was truly disappointed to find that she and her friends weren't sitting around and just talking about how great he is. So in a misguided attempt to incept a love for him that surely was bubbling just below the surface of her thoughts, he gently whispers, Marco, in her ear. Only, in her brain, because, thoughts speak. In any case, you pretty much know the rest of how that plays out, so I'll just pick up with the entire house being ripped off of its foundation. Still in mid-morph, Marco and Axe catch a glimpse of Jake's tornado pancake, but instead describe it as more of a huge monster made entirely out of teeth and blades and dragon wings. Like a tornado. As the murder beast stares down at him with dozens of misplaced eyes, Marco is quite certain that this monstrosity is definitely the way that he dies. So, needless to say, it comes as an incredible relief when, just as suddenly and mysteriously as it appeared, the thing vanishes in a cloud of dust. What the fuck? Someone wakes up on their back in a bed of pine needles. How did they get there? They don't know. Where are they supposed to be? They don't know that either. What's their name? They don't know that either, but it's Rachel. I was just doing a bit because she has amnesia. Yes, waking up with the feet of an eagle would be concerning enough for the young lass, but when you literally can't remember that that's just a thing that you do sometimes, it's a waking nightmare. Initially uncertain as to whether she's a bird that got stuck transforming into a human, or a human halfway transformed into a bird, she settles on the one that doesn't have to hunt for its own food, so that's one problem solved. Tobias uses another page to explain to us how he used to be a dweeb, and how he's trapped in a hawk's body, and how a thermal is an updraft of warm air, before explaining to us something else that has already been explained to us, the events of Darlene's party, as the strangest thing he's ever witnessed. Apparently a dust devil is more unusual than a literal god stopping by to talk environmentalism. Granted, the dust devil was made out of teeth and razors or whatever, but still. In any case, the only new information that he offers is that when the whatever it was took off, it took off toward the woods. And that was not the direction the wind was blowing. Rachel is still working on losing the last of her feathers when the wind doesn't blow in her direction, wonk. Just in time for her to run, the blender tornado descends upon her, making matchsticks of the trees and pursuing with the vigor that one would expect from a very angry cloud, only, much, much worse. Which I guess explains why Rachel decides sprinting into 6 lanes of freeway is the better option, though granted it could just be because she at least remembers what traffic is. The beast, however, does not, and fears not the trucks and cars of man. As Rachel dives through the median, some poor schmuck driving a Ben & Jerry's truck finds out what it's like to have some weird monster cyclone vaporize your vehicle when you're going 90 miles per hour. Turns out it's mostly just a lot of grinding noises and flying tubs of Cherry Garcia and wavy gravy. What the hell? Anyway, I guess the murder storm is lactose intolerant because just as soon as the chunky monkey hits the asphalt, it dissipates faster than chunky monkey on asphalt. Rachel may still be an amnesiac teenage girl in a leotard standing barefoot in dirty water, but at least she's alive. Cassie finally gets a chance to speak directly to us, the readers, and somehow resists the urge to spend several pages explaining that she's an Animorph, and how Rachel is her best friend, and that Visser 3 is a mean SOB or some such, and instead opts to tell us about the news. The whole gang, Tobias and Rachel notwithstanding, are yelling at the TV in Cassie's living room. The local report is that both incidents, the one at the party and the one on the freeway, were freak tornadoes. Those that were actually there to see them strongly disagree. Now, before they can start debating what they actually saw, they notice something pretty suspicious amidst the chaos on the highway. They, too, have never heard of wavy gravy. But also that blonde girl in the background is definitely Rachel. Rachel would probably spend another several pages telling us that she and Jake are cousins, and that Jake's brother Tom is a controller, and that her father recently moved away or whatever, if she could literally remember any of that. But seeing as how she can't, she instead regales us with a basic description of the concept of amnesia, even referring to it as such, even though she can't remember how she knows that word. As she keeps to the shadows of the wood along the highway, she spots something bright yellow amongst the browns and the greens and realizes it's a shirt. Most likely from The Limited, which is apparently a clothier that existed in the 90s. She doesn't know that, but she does recognize the shirt as being from The Limited, even though she, like myself, does not know what The Limited is. Beside said limited top is the promise of a refuge. A quiet, ramshackle cottage that definitely probably doesn't belong to a serial killer. As our heroine contemplates the ethical implications of stealing this shirt from the clothesline, a voice from behind startles her with, and I swear I'm not making this up, "If you want to return the item, you'll need a receipt." Turns out it was an old woman, clearly mentally ill. Not based on that, but based on her need to repeat it over and over again as Rachel plays along. She follows the lady inside and finds a hoarder's bounty of clothing. As Rachel's new, and by extension only and best friend, begins unloading her haversack of, you guessed it, more clothes, she asks the woman's name. What follows is an exchange that I can only describe as interesting, because I know what happens later on in the book, and some stuff that happens later on in the series, and I feel like maybe it was meant to be foreshadowing? The crone responds to Rachel's request with, "My name or its name? We are two, not one." When our girl specifies that she's asking the woman her name, the response is, "It's gone now, but it will be back. Oh yes, they'll be back. They never go away forever." So at this point, it's pretty clear to me that this woman is at least familiar with the Yeerks, or more likely and far more interestingly, may in fact be a former controller, possibly several times over. Of course, rather than providing more useful information, she instead accuses Rachel, who again, because amnesia cannot make any of the connections that I'm making, of trying to steal from her. In sore need of footwear, Rachel cleverly tricks this woman into accepting a chunk of wood as payment. As she digs for a pair, or rather, any two shoes in roughly her size, the old woman sneaks up behind her and, throwing herself upon, accuses Rachel of being a Yeerk. I knew it! She shoves Rachel through a trapdoor in the floor, trapping her in the cellar. Not really a cellar, it's more like an enclosure that's small enough that Rachel has to duck to avoid being hit in the head when she slams the hatch shut. The only benefit to this whole exchange is that the woman's constant repetition of the Y word evokes some vague recollection that Yeerks are something bad. Though to be fair, even if she wasn't uncovering lost memories, the fact that this crazy lady is shouting it at her while she's locking her in a cage would probably have done a pretty good job of enforcing that word as negative. Elsewhere, Jake and Marco have found their way to the gas station where the remains of the Ben & Jerry's truck has been towed, just to, get it off the highway. Wandering into the woods, they're joined by Tobias, who gives them a lecture on the importance of preening that I'm not going to get into because, let's face it, this video is going to be more than long enough without it. While they're waiting for Axe, they send Tobias topside to keep watch as they assume wolf morph, the better with which to track dear Rachel. Needless to say, Jake spends a page explaining how morphing is weird, but it's not painful, but it is creepy, before Tobias reports back with, "Oh shit, the murder tornado is coming!" Rachel apparently warrants getting every other friggin' chapter in this book, so she catches us up on her efforts to remember her past. Giant centipedes, lizard people covered in blades, ants, some weird blue deer thing dying. Oh, and then suddenly the shack is on fire. I guess the old lady thinks that Rachel is a Yeerk come to take her again, and she will have none of it. Rachel, despite not even knowing who Rachel is, will have none of her not having it, and in a sort of reflexive fight-or-flight reaction, begins turning into a bear. Marco and Jake agree that facing Flying Cuisinart in wolf form is at least an iota better than facing it in human form, and take off. As whatever the hell it is carves a canyon through the forest, they realize that making kindling, while it certainly doesn't stop it, it does seem to slow it down. So, using their keen schnozzes to sniff out thicker wood, they sniff out thicker wood until they come to a stretch of open field. Certain that the monster will catch them with no such trees to slow it down, they plow forward, only for the beast to inexplicably turn around and head off in the opposite direction. Again, whack Rachel. I wrote, as a joke, only to turn the page and see, yep, it's Rachel again. She's a bear now, and that grants her the strength to break free from her prison just as the cabin above is reduced to ash/splinters. Of course, now the monster is here, so starting to see a theme here. Anyway, as the beast looms, the other beast, Rachel, suddenly hears a voice in her head that I can only assume is Jiminy Cricket. "Rachel, is that you? Is that you in Morph? It's me, Jiminy Cricket, Axe." Before Rachel can respond, and also realize that Rachel is she, the monster attacks, which, seeing as how it is literally just a cloud of destruction, I guess just means move slightly in her direction. Axe spends yet another page telling us all about how he's an Andalite and how his brother gave the humans the morphing technology right before Visitor 3 murdered him, and then they found him in the ocean or some such. That's the last one, I swear. I think. Before finally bringing us up to speed on this strange new nightmare alien. Specifically, that he has absolutely no idea what it is. Nice going, Axe and Millie. You had one job. Anyway, Axe is on his way to meet the boys when he notices an apparently non-living cloud of smoke rising into the sky, just as a cloud of very clearly living something comes ripping through the overbrush, like the opposite of the underbrush, underbrush, like the plant bits on top, like the leaves and shit. You know what I'm talking about. Axe decides that the best place to hide from whatever that thing is a nearby on-fire shack in a beautiful pastoral on-fire clearing, where, like Goldilocks before him, he encounters a bear. You may recognize this as exactly where the last chapter ended. Before either party can do anything beyond casually revealing that they have amnesia, Rachel, is that my name? That thing for which I really need to think of a name makes slurry out of one of Rachel's paws, so that's cool. Even cooler, it then does the same thing to her other paw. And Axe, knowing full well that there's nothing he can do to save Rachel as Chompers, I thought of a name, envelops her hairy form, cuts his losses, and decides that the next best thing is simply to be ready to follow it back to wherever it calls home. Mere seconds into assuming his trusty Harrier morph, Chompers abandons Rachel in her hairiest morph, and lunges at the young Andalite in a way that only a gas can. It is at exactly this moment that I start to feel a little bit bad for shaming Axe about not doing his job before, because he realizes almost immediately that whatever this creature is, it seems to be drawn to the very act of morphing itself, or morphing energy, whatever the fuck that means, and reverses his transformation right quick. Sadly, Chompers has already set its gaze on him, but at least it does him the courtesy of not removing any body parts as it wraps him up and carries him off. To where, you ask? Well, Axe seems to have figured it out, but before he can tell us, he hands us over to Jake. Smells something funky. Some things funky, in fact. Burning wood. 1, hold it. 2 humans. Blood. Like a bear's blood. Well, that makes sense, because he also smells a bear. And, what is that? That's not a smell a wolf knows. Wolf knows. It is definitely a smell that Jake should probably recognize by now, though, because it's Axe. Jake and Marco do the whole yarn and push pin routine, trying to figure out why one of the humans wasn't wearing shoes, and to whom all that blood belonged, and what could even make a grizzly bear bleed, before Tobias thankfully swoops in and demonstrates once again why most animals evolve 2 eyes and only 1 nose. Tobias confirms that Rachel fought Chompers, though I'm not sure how he knew its name, before walking off scene like some sort of adorable, inspiring YouTube dog to the river where Tobias lost the trail. Nice going, Tobias. You had 1 job. Jake does his best to convince Tobias that he's not the worst boyfriend ever, before wondering, what happened with Axe? I mean, Tobias saw tracks leading into the clearing, but then they just sort of end. Almost as if he was carried off or something. Convinced that the Yeerks are somehow responsible for Chompers, and without the input of Axe, Jake and Marco decide that their big bads must somehow know their identity. I mean, how else could it possibly be coming after just them? I know. I've read the book, but then again, so do you guys, because Axe just said it. Cassie apparently drew the short straw because we cut to her at the mall by herself. I guess the logic was that if they didn't find Rachel out by the giant puddle of ice cream, the mall would be the place to find her. Sound enough thinking, but why does she have to go all by herself while the men are off saying that they're hunting when really they're just drinking beer on a duck blind? I'm kidding. Not about the beer thing. That was an obvious joke. It's because Cassie is a big ol' wuss who just also happens to give the leader weird tingly pants feelings. Anyway, Cassie is at the mall thinking that all that stuff I just said is a little sexist, which it may be, but Jake said it first. Regardless, Cassie sees no signs of Rachel, but whom she does spot amidst the crowds that apparently used to inhabit shopping malls is one Assistant Principal Chapman. Why is that relevant? I don't know, I guess Cassie's been feeling a little bit insecure about her role in the group. What else is new? And decides he must know something about Chompers. So, naturally, she follows the guy into the B. Dalton bookstore. Quaint! And then, again, to give Cassie something to do, she decides that the best way to spy on Chapman is as a fly. I guess she forgot how great that cockroach plan from the last book went. Fortunately, it appears that the Elemist runs this particular bookstore because the door to the staff-only section is left ajar. You know how retail establishments are. And just by luck, the employee bathroom is right there. Hell, she'd be stupid not to morph into a fly at this point, which she does. Over the course of 2 more pages. Okay, that has to be the last one. Axe is finally released from his toothy prison just in time to be dumped unceremoniously on the deck of Visser 3's blade ship. Before he can finish explaining to us, again, about how the Hork-Bajir used to be a peaceful people and how there are no free Hork-Bajir left, I give up. He is instead interrupted by the need to explain to us, again, who Visser 3 is and how he's the only Andalite controller and all those things that we already know because Visser 3 shows up. Quite pleased with himself for having come up with what he thinks is a cooler name than Chompers for his new morph-hunting monster. I guess he calls it a Valik, which is probably some badass Yeerk word meaning hunter or devourer. Oh, nope, it means pet. Real creative. Perhaps more interesting than Visser 3's talent for naming things is that apparently they found this Valik right here in the Sol system on our very own Saturn, so that's kind of fun. Also, I have to give Visser 3 credit here because he admits that he was starting to suspect that the Andalite bandits might actually be human, which really just means that enough of his underlings had floated the idea as a possibility that he'd at least internalized it. But then, of course, I have to retract all of that credit immediately because he assumes that the fact that Axe is an Andalite means that they all are. Logic! Knowing he's not in any position to do anything but get disintegrated, Axe decides to ask questions on the off chance that he manages to escape. Visser 3, as a cartoon villain who apparently has no memory of his numerous failures over the past few months, obliges. How did they make a controller out of something composed of dust? They didn't. It's dumb, and they trained it to do what they wanted it to do, like a homing pigeon or a foxhound or a fast food employee. How? He never says exactly, but apparently the particles are all individual organisms that work together to take down prey. Sort of like a more murdery version of John Ratzenberger's character from Finding Nemo, or that Pokemon based off of John Ratzenberger's character from Finding Nemo. Anyway, apparently they feed off of life form energy, which he talks about like it's Metroid food, but I'm pretty sure in this case it's just calories. So from there, I guess it was really easy to train it to hunt morphing energy, which is a thing that exists apparently. But I guess it can't eat morphing energy because instead they train it to feed off of the energy from the Blade ship's engines as like a reward for hunting morphing energy, like a more fucked up Pavlov, I don't know. Cassie, now a fly, follows Chapman and a couple of other controllers around long enough to learn all the important points from the last chapter. Chompers is called the leak, and Chapman refers to it as a morph hunter. They also mention how, rumor has it, the Council of 13 is disappointed in the good Visser's performance lately and may demote him to 4 or even 5 if he doesn't get his shit together, and also the Yeerks control about 10% of the police force. Exciting stuff. Are Cassie stories boring because she's Cassie, or is Cassie boring because she gets boring stories? Rachel, meanwhile, erstwhile, since we're cutting back to the moments right after she lost her right to bear arms. Ha! Apparently, after the disarming, she wandered off into a shallow stream and managed to demorph, even though she doesn't know what that is, all while wondering what that weird scorpion deer thing meant when it said Rachel. Was she Rachel? Was that thing an alien? Was it a friend or an enemy? Why does she like Apple Jacks if they don't taste like apple? In a flash, she remembers a construction site, dark skies, heavy equipment, surrounded by others, a spaceship landing. None of which is particularly helpful, but at least she realizes the answers probably lie back in civilization. Oh, except for the Apple Jacks thing. She just does. Marco and the gang, 2/3 of it in any case, are back in the barn, pointing out as nicely as possible that Tobias really dropped the ball back there. They say they're not blaming him for anything, but they should be, because how does he not notice a fucking forest fire? What is he, the Brazilian government? In any case, with the help of Cassie's Morph Hunter intel, they figure out that Chompers is the Morph Hunter. Marco, wise beyond his years, points out that this means that as long as they don't morph, they should be safe, but he also points out that this would make for a pretty boring second half of the book. So on Rachel's behalf, he says that it's time for them to kick butt. Rachel has reached the suburbs and is just so fucking done with this day, poor girl. She needs to sleep, but she's smelly and she's dirty and she's achy and she doesn't know whom she can trust, so she opts to sneak into a house with no lights on and a sold sign out front. She finds a faucet and she drinks her fill. She finds a fridge and eats a box of Nilla wafers someone left on the counter because the fridge is empty. As she lay inhaling the paint fumes, she falls asleep to the expected nightmares. She's in a construction site. It's dark. There's a light in the sky. There are others around her. One of them is a girl, but the girl has no face. One of them is a boy with a face, but it's the face of an, eagle or something. She's walking on a balance beam, wobbling clumsily, until she looks down and sees her cat feet. The audience screams angrily at her because they have worms in their heads. She's in a cave, and those headworms from the last sentence are swimming around in a giant puddle. Also, there are snakes covered in razor blades. And the ants. She's covered in ants. Anyway, she wakes up remembering the word Animorph, though not what it means, of course, just in time for the cops to start banging on the door. Apparently, one of the neighbors saw her sneak in. Now, certain that she doesn't want to be arrested, but uncertain as to whether or not the bear that she'd been earlier was still armless, she rifles through her fragmented memories for something even more powerful, because, let's face it, surely somebody has this place insured. Jake and the gang, feeling completely impotent in the face of being forced to live like the rest of us plebes who can't even turn into animals, call it a night. Tobias flaps off into the darkness while the 3 lame humans stay behind and talk about how much it would suck if Rachel and Axe were dead. Fortunately, they don't have long to reminisce about how much more they like Rachel, because they're suddenly distracted by a random fast-moving cloud passing in front of the moon before things get too xenophobic. So now they're faced with an impossible choice. Do something, or do nothing. I guess it's not that impossible, because ultimately they just decide to steal Cassie's dad's pickup truck and use their morph energy to distract the alien scum from whichever one of their missing comrades it's currently locked chasing. Oh, there's the xenophobia. Rachel can hardly even hear the cops anymore at this point, despite having ears the size of funnel cakes. However, before she can reduce to splinters the front wall of this poor stranger's new house, Chompers reduces to splinters the back wall of this poor stranger's new house. So she decides now would be a good time to reduce to splinters the front wall of this poor stranger's new house. Outside, she barrels past 4 cops, who I guess were at least 2 days away from retirement, only to be immediately pursued by a hail of bullets and chompers. She blasts through the suburbs like some sort of leather-skinned block party featuring Rage Against the Machine, but even as an amnesiac, Rachel is still a hero. She realizes that if she continues to flee, the beast, and probably the cops, I have no idea what happened to them, will inevitably continue to give chase, and there are probably innocent people sleeping in at least some of these houses, though hopefully not the Winnebago that she already destroyed. So with exactly the kind of resolve we've come to expect from our girl, she turns her mastodonic frame to face her pursuer. Once the Valik is finished, presumably picking police bones out of its teeth, using more police bones, it wastes no time, enveloping her in the massive tentacles that it only seems to have when it's abducting someone. Even as huge and strong as she is in her current form, she can feel herself being crushed under its weight as it lifts her into the air, and then puts her right back down again, because even if the beast had taken the time to stretch, an elephant is, well, yeah, it's fucking heavy. Just as Rachel is zinging chompers with a one-liner, the screech of tires cuts through the buzzing? I don't know, I pictured the Valik kind of making a buzzing noise. Is that just me? Marco is back a few minutes ago, catching us up on how his tires came to cut through all that buzzing. Remember when Marco and Cassie and Jake decided, but really Marco decided and Cassie and Jake decided not to argue for some reason, that they should steal Cassie's dad's truck? Well, it's going about as well as Cassie and Jake figured it would. This chapter is a lot of screaming and property destruction. Somewhere between the 7th trash can or so and the buzz cutting, the gang spots a weird half-elephant, half-blonde darting across the road a couple of streets up, followed by a gigantic, swirling mass of horror. Relieved to find that Rachel is not dead, or I guess if she is, at least they have a replacement lined up, they are even more relieved when the monster shows its hand that it doesn't have, could have wanted to, probably. One, the fact that the elephant remains an elephant and not dog food means that that thing is not trying to kill them, even though it totally could. And two, it can't lift an elephant. Now, rather than realizing that they kind of have the thing exactly where they want it, sort of, they instead decide to go with the original plan of keep away. Marco slows down just enough that Cassie can hop out, and an almost tiger Jake can swing himself into the flatbed, drawing the beast away with his morphing energy. Seriously, guys, it's a thing. Look it up. Jake is almost a tiger when Marco pulls onto the freeway, but at least the Valik is no longer their biggest concern. Between Marco's terrible driving and the resultant strong words from other folks on the road, it's almost a relief when Marco decides we don't need roads and veers off into the forest, making the flying mulcher once again the only thing threatening their lives. In the safety of the woods, Jake makes a break for it, tearing through the foliage while Marco and the truck speed off in the opposite direction. With the Valik hot on his striped tail, Jake decides that a tiger, which I'll remind you can sprint at nearly 35 knots, just plain isn't fast enough to outrun this wave, so instead he'll have to rely on his exquisite feline maneuverability. It's time for a gambit. So, with the confidence that only a middle schooler with the body of a tiger can summon, you know that old cliche, Jake turns to face the chompers. In a flash, he rockets all 400 plus pounds of his sinewy frame at the hungry cumulus, pounces, and then deliberately lands short, sliding under his foe like some sort of big cat Indiana Jones, minus the hat. It's pretty rad. Of course, all it proves is that the Valik, for whatever reason, can't turn on a dime, but that's something. Not enough, though. Jake's already winded, so he makes the only tactical move of which he can think. He climbs a tree. Remember those thousands of trees that the Valik's already chomped? Yeah. Marco, as the driver of the vehicle that just sped away, would be the logical narrator here, but it's actually Rachel. Again, who picks up right where he left her a couple of chapters ago before the last two chapters happened. Her elephantine feet cracked the pavement, and suddenly she remembers that she was going to meet Tobias, whoever that is, right before she was attacked by an armada of asshole crows, whatever they are, and something. The point is that she remembers the name Tobias. Much more important is the girl left behind, whom Rachel recognizes as the girl from the construction site that she remembered just a little while ago. The girl in overalls who tells her that she's her friend, and Rachel's all like, what? And Cassie's like, yeah, girl, you're my fam. And Rachel's all, for real? And Cassie's like, yup. Axe is somehow the narrator of this next chapter, because Applegate thought that the best way to punctuate this wacky chase would be with a description of a windowless cell, a bunch of aliens with which we're already very familiar, and a literal video playback of the last several chapters. Maybe she was right. Maybe it would work better on film. Looking at you, Netflix. Marco. Remember Marco? He's the one driving the truck. You know what I'm talking about. Well, he manages to get back on the road, loops back around to the subdivision, and morphs the only morph that he has, or anyone has, that can drive. The gorilla. You guys got that, right? Rachel is stomping through the neighborhood, Cassie riding on her back and giving her the skinny on just who exactly this Rachel person is. She tells her that she's an Animorph and what an Animorph is and who the other Animorphs are and that the Yeerks are bad and basically just everything that was already covered in the first few pages of the first 8 chapters or so before finally getting to the current plan of keeping chompers moving until it tires out. Can it tire out? But that's the plan. And now that it's Cassie's turn, she settles on squirrel. That can't be right. Oh, okay. I guess the plan is to continue hiding out on Rachel and use her girth for protection. I was just confused because that's actually not a terrible idea. Marco is zooming through the subdivision at 70 miles per hour, the tornado of teeth looming ever nearer in the rearview mirror. It's actually looking like he might be able to outrun the thing, but then that last Axe chapter rears its ugly head, a joke which makes a lot more sense if I'd bothered to tell you that that chapter ended with Visser 3 dispatching bug fighters because he was on to their little game of keep away. In any case, bug fighters show up, blast Cassie's dad's truck off the road, send 300 pounds of gorilla hurtling through the air, and force Marco to commence demorphing. Cassie is somehow still in the process of becoming a squirrel when a blast from a Dracon beam knocks over an entire elephant. The Valik has found its prey. 3 preys. in fact. But as long as they don't morph, or in Cassie's case, morph any further, it doesn't seem to know which prey on which to prey. Cassie points out that this is exactly the situation she'd been dreaming about way back at the beginning of this video. Does she keep morphing and sacrifice herself? Or... wait. Okay, so we've already established that Rachel's too big for Choppers to carry, but she's also gravely injured. Marco, he may be nearby, but Cassie doesn't know if he's getting ready to demorph. Cassie is half squirrel, but thus far not being carried off. And those bug fighters are there with Dracon beams at the ready no matter what happens. How exactly is this evil asking her to choose who lives and who dies again? I'll tear it apart later. Axe is watching all of this unfold on Visser 3's dope-ass flat screen. The truck, the elephant, everything. Except for that clearly half-human squirrel. Nobody seems to notice that. Content with his pet's new capture, the Visser takes his leave with strict instructions that the elephant be guarded closely until it demorphs so that Chompers can go back for it. Axe is left alone again in his windowless cell. Feeling as helpless as ever, Axe is startled when he suddenly feels a sharp pain in his arm. You remember that seemingly irrelevant bit of exposition back when Marco was trying to convince him to go to a high school party? Well, looks like Marco never held up his end of the deal because our alien friend is still riddled with parasites. And it's a good thing, too, because you might recall that parasites have DNA, and Axe is in dire need of an escape plan. Or at least just, something to do, because windowless cells are pretty dull. So Axe morphs a flea and waits for someone to open the cage. Which they do, because they see that he's not in there anymore. Lol, irony. Marco, turns out, was the lucky winner of the complimentary flight to space. When the literal dust settles, Marco finds himself, still a gorilla and still alive, on the floor of the deck of the worst place orbiting Earth, Visser 3's blade ship. The angry Andalite insists that he demorph, but obviously he doesn't do that, and instead he focuses more on the mind-shouted orders to find that Andalite who didn't disappear, but just morphed something small. Using his impressive powers of perception, Marco is somehow able to piece this information together to figure out that Axe must very well be on board, and very small. Almost immediately, whose voice should pop into his head but that very Axe. And better still, he's got a plan. Even betterer stiller, it's less dumb than trying to make a cloud tired. The alien explains, cagily, that on his signal, Marco needs to lumber as quickly as he can over to any control panel, touch the glowy tablet thing, and think, open hatch. What signal? Well, he'll know it when he sees it. Sure enough, when he sees the leak go all spin cycle on 11 moments later, he knows it. As its tendrils engulf a very confused Visser 3, and everything in the room not bolted down or a gorilla joins the vortex, our boy lunges for the nearest computer. As he punches his way through a couple of aliens, he's able to hear an apparently very thirsty Visser 3 thought-screaming for water, just in time for that hatch Axe mentioned before to open. As the ceiling above them splits, it becomes clear that I was wrong when I made that joke about space travel before, because hey, blue sky! Or at least, night sky? What time is it? The point is that they're in the atmosphere, which means now they can... Axe jumps in just in time, because just like Marco, I had no idea what the next step of the plan was. If I were a betting man, I'd guess abandon ship. Now that the Valik has begun the whole swaddling routine on Visser 3, Axe throws his demorph in reverse because he still needs those powerful legs for the next bit. He had demorphed just a little bit to draw the Valik to Visser 3. Did I forget to mention that? As he sends himself flying into the maelstrom, Axe is shocked to find himself stuck. To something. Some weird-looking, flea-sized creature with 100 wings and satellite dish antenna or some such. The point is, as the Visser mentioned a few chapters ago, apparently the Valik is not a single creature at all, but a colony of sorts. Billions of minuscule flying aliens with the ability to bond together into larger structures like eyes or teeth, sort of like the ants in that Woody Allen movie, or, Voltron. That mystery solved, Axe can now focus his gigantic alien brain on the next mystery at hand. Why Visser 3 so thirsty all of a sudden? Well, as a single drop of water the relative size of a Volkswagen wraps itself around his teeny tiny body, it becomes clear that, much like a flea or a wicked witch, each of these little buggers becomes completely incapacitated in the presence of even a minuscule amount of water. Mystery number 3, the next step of the plan. Turns out running commentary on me was right. Abandoned ship. But first, mystery 2.5, how to get to Marco. Some clever foot stomping and a couple of hops, skips, and climbing Hork-Bajir like a ladder later, and the two good guys in this chapter are reunited and ready to jump on to mystery 5. How long does it take to double morph into birds, and is that time less than it takes to fall approximately 2 miles? Rachel hasn't said anything since, apparently, she got hit by Cassie's dad's truck a few chapters ago. Turns out that her giant elephant head hitting the ground like that must have knocked something loose, because suddenly she remembers everything, like some sort of old Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Flintstones, let's say. Cassie and Rachel quickly resume human form despite the two bug fighters hovering overhead while their pilots presumably cover their eyes while also not riddling the girls with Dracon beams while they take another minute or two to morph into owls. It seems that famous Yerk cordiality has a limit, though, because as soon as our girls are feathered up, 2 Hork-Bajir drop from on high ready to make owl schnitzel. Before they can do that, however, a friggin' tiger comes out of nowhere, knocks those aliens for a loop, and everybody escapes. Marco and Axe have to morph quickly from gorilla and fleet to human and Andalite to Osprey and Harry, so I'm just gonna blaze right through this chapter. The point is that they make it. Yay! Jake doesn't make it home until nearly midnight. His parents ground the ever-loving crap out of him, and he is far too tired to argue. Then again, what would he even say? He drags his sorry carcass to bed, convinced that he'll never see Marco or Axe again, and that the fight to save humanity is officially lost. And he's almost relieved. You know? No more fighting. Rachel is safe, and Rachel again. At last, he can rest. Booga, booga, booga! Is the graceful way that Marco reveals that not only is he alive, but he's in Jake's bedroom. Also, Jake just got a solid 10 hours of dreamless sleep, and that's good, because he's going to need them. It's time to plan the counterattack. Or rather, it will be in a few hours after Jake is done cleaning the garage, because like I said, super grounded. But at least this will get his mom off of his dad's case. Cassie and the rest of the team are finally all together for the first time in all 203 pages up to this point. Marco is telling the gang about all the cool stuff that he learned while he was still up on the blade ship, while Cassie is standing in the corner thinking about how she let him get carried off because she's such a coward. Which we, as readers, all know very well at this point, but she seems to be taking it pretty hard. Fortunately, she has a plan. There's a lot of planning in this book that will not only solve the Valik problem, but also forever wash away her guilt until I'm guessing the first chapter of her next book. Tobias finally gets another chapter. He was sleeping during the chase scene that, even though it couldn't have taken more than, maybe an hour? Accounts for nearly a third of the total page count. Oh, did you want to hear Cassie's plan? Yeah, so did I. See, Cassie explained the plan real quiet-like so that the group could hear it, but we, the readers, couldn't. Instead, we get to piece it together ourselves. Hence, a very short chapter in which Tobias does a little uncharacteristic ocean flying and manages to find that which Cassie seeks. A whale. Cassie and the rest of the gang, minus Axe, no morphing, remember, are strolling down the beach acting casual when Tobias returns with his cetaceous news. Jake and Rachel try to talk Cassie out of whatever it is she's going to do, but redemption aside, she firmly believes that as the best morpher, she is in fact the only person in the group who can handle 3 morphs and demorphs in a matter of just a few minutes, especially if one of them is a new morph. And this is what I meant when I said we get to figure it out for ourselves, which I know I made it sound like I hate, but I actually really like it when Applegate does resort to it. Makes me feel smart. The team, reluctantly, agrees that this particular job is all Cassie. So together they wade out into the surf and swim far enough out that they won't be spotted by any controller lifeguards or controller beachcombers or, just regular people. And Cassie assumes morph number 1, dolphin. I mean, so do the rest of them, but that's not really explained in the plan. Wait a minute. They're morphing already. What about chompers? Oh, right. That's probably part of the plan. Sure enough, the Valik arrives almost immediately, but it can't touch them when they're in the water. It doesn't even try. It just sort of swirls there like some sort of, the whipped topping on a pumpkin spice latte. But wait, now that it's there, what are they going to do? Splash it? Oh, I bet that's part of the plan. So the inappropriately merry pod rockets off in the vague direction that Tobias indicated, and just a few clicks and chirps later, we're right back in the message because Cassie's having a full-fledged conversation with a whale. After asking the Great One not to dive, and openly admitting that she has no way of knowing whether or not old humpback can even understand what she's saying, she commences demorph number 1. Wait, she's demorphing while she's still underwater. That can't be right. Wait. That must be part of the plan as well. So she surfaces for just a moment, long enough to refill her lungs, and then proceeds to acquire the whale, all while waxing on about how she should be asking permission, because in her mind this is still somehow comparable to a year taking a controller. Oh, but I guess the ends justify the means this time. Oh, I bet she's gonna blast the Valik out of the sky with like a water spout or something. That's probably the plan. Tobias is bitching to himself about how hard it is to fly over open water with Cassie on his back in morph number 2, a cockroach, while the others partial morph back and forth below to keep their quarry busy. Rather than admit this to Cassie, suddenly the most important member on the team, he instead decides to unload about how he lives in constant fear of being eaten all the time. This makes Cassie feel better for some reason. Wait, does this mean that a water spout isn't part of the plan? Anyway, once they're a mile up, Cassie hits the eject button and as she tumbles through the air, initiates demorph number 2. Oh, that's the plan. Wait, where does the whale come in? As the ground rushes up at her with increasing speed, so too does the dust monster that all this shit has been about. As its ephemeral tentacles envelop her exhausted form, that form begins to grow and turn all rubbery and torpedo-shaped like some sort of, gigantic maritalate or something. Okay, now I get it. Rachel and the other human dolphins watch with sickening anticipation from below. Even with the Valik wrapped tightly around her, Cassie continues to grow and grow as she plummets seaward. Initially, Chomper seems to act as a kind of parachute, slowing their collective fall to slightly less lethal velocity. But as she reaches the full size of morph number 3, it is not enough. In the last few seconds, the Valik tries to bail out, but it's too late. An adult humpback whale and a cloud of teeth hit the waves, and only an adult humpback whale surfaces. Oh, that was the plan. I knew it. Awash in the glow of one of their plans actually working for once, the party proceeds to celebrate in a way that only 3 dolphins and 1 really big dolphin can. Tobias celebrates by finally fucking landing somewhere, probably, and Axe is just, I don't know, probably at home watching old Golden Girls reruns or something. I don't know. Wait, that's the end. I should probably have said something a little more poignant.
Thank you very much.